Fox News alert, President Trump comes to the defense of Roy Moore as he attacks Moore's Democratic rival. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Melissa Francis in for Harris Faulkner. To many, it has all the looks of an endorsement, the president defending embattled candidate Roy Moore before leaving for the Thanksgiving break, saying Moore has totally denied decades-old allegations of sexual misconduct with teens and emphasizing that he does not want Moore's Democratic opponent to win.
I can tell you one thing for sure. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat. Jones, I've looked at his record. It's terrible on crime. It's terrible on the border. It's terrible in the military. I can tell you for a fact, we do not need somebody that's going to be bad on crime, bad on borders, bad with the military, bad for the Second Amendment. Let me just tell you, Roy Moore denies it. That's all I can say. He denies it. And by the way, he totally denies it.
The president also leaving the door open to campaigning with Moore in Alabama ahead of the December 12th special election. White House correspondent Kevin Cork joins us live from our Washington bureau. So, Kevin, does the White House really believe that campaigning with Roy Moore is a good strategy, or is this a political head fake by the president?
I like the way you put that, a political head fake. Listen, a couple ways you could look at this. I think the truth is the White House knows that the president can be, shall we say, unconventional and unpredictable. And so, politically speaking, you never know which way he may decide to go. But he is his own man, after all. Now, that said, I think there's also this calculation that as long as that is out there, this not only keeps the opposition off balance, it also gives the White House a chance to say, hey, listen, you never know. The president might get out and do this, even if it is against political convention. And you and I have talked about this on a number of occasions. This president really enjoys going against political convention, right? I mean, that's sort of the way he has made his way into office. Now, Moore, of course, is in the battle of his political life, trying to fill a seat in the Senate for a Republican in Alabama, no less, would normally, frankly, be a sure thing. But with allegations of misconduct that allegedly happened decades ago, well, that's really thrown this race into question. Now, yesterday, before leaving for the winter White House at Mar-a-Lago, the president finally weighed in on whether or not he believes Moore or his accusers.
Well, he denies. I mean, Roy Moore denies it. And by the way, he gives a total denial. And I do have to say, 40 years is a long time. He's run 8 races, and this has never come up. So 40 years is a long time.
Now, for his part, as you can well imagine, Melissa, Moore is not only casting doubt on what the accusers are saying about him, he's also casting doubt on this story idea that you probably have read about, the suggestion that a mall back in the 1970s would ban him from their property. Listen to what he had to say about that.
I think for the people watching, and if they can remember back 40 years, even then, if a district attorney deputy would have been banned from the mall, that would have been on the front page of the paper.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Now, as you know, the good folks of the state of Alabama, the Yellow Hammer State, will actually get a chance to go to the polls and make their voices heard. That, of course, coming up, as you pointed out, on December 12th, which gives you and I plenty of time to talk about it in the meantime, Melissa.
Yeah, seriously. So what is Doug Jones, who, of course, is Moore's Democratic opponent, saying about the president's comments?
Well, this is the thing. This is the complicated part of this race. Keep in mind that the president enjoys a great deal of popularity, not just among Republicans in the state of Alabama, but also among Democrats in the state of Alabama. They may or may not have voted for him, but he is popular overall, which means if you are Doug Jones, you have to be careful in your criticism because you don't want to alienate potential voters. Now, that said, Moore has had a fairly strong ad campaign, and I think you'll find this interesting, too. He has also made it clear that he is going to take some shots at his opponents in and out of office history. Listen to this.
I'm applying for a job. Roy Moore is applying for a job. He can't seem to hold one.
That a not-so-veiled reference to the fact that Moore has been ushered out of office a couple of times. We'll see if he can make his way into a 6-year term. Of course, again, that's coming up on December 12th, Melissa.
Whew, my goodness. All right, thank you for that. So what to make of the president appearing to throw his support behind Moore? And could this be a real game changer in the race? Let's bring in Republican Congressman Mike Walker of North Carolina, who chairs the Republican Study Committee. Let's focus a little bit on the politics of this, if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay.
What do you think?
Well, I think from my perspective, and maybe there's a little bit of a pastoral perspective, I spent nearly 2 decades as a minister. My thoughts are this: there are no criminal convictions, there's no criminal charges that have been made. However, if you listen and even watch the interview from a couple of days ago from Ms. Gorfman, there is a little bit of credibility in these charges, and it creates some concern. However, you have to stop short from imposing from a federal standpoint. Maybe you could say it this way: the jury in this case is Alabama, and the people of Alabama should make the final decision.
Right, but I mean, politically going forward, what is the most dangerous move here if we want to kind of take that tack and examine that issue? Because if Republicans, usher into Congress someone who is carrying, these kind of questions and allegations with them, does it damage the party, even though the party did not on a national level support Roy Moore? I don't know that a lot of people are going to make make that distinction going forward.
Sure. Now, Melissa, that's a great question, but I hope that we are not looking at these kinds of situations from a political perspective first. When there are victims in a situation, allegedly in this case, that should override a long-term forecasting as far as what's better for Republicans or what's better for Democrats. Of course, in reality, this does change the course, whether it's tax reform, whether it's other issues that are part of the agenda, both from the administration as well as House Republicans and Senate as well. This is a huge factor, but we do not cloud our judgment from a federal standpoint or from just a humanitarian standpoint that we override decisions or behavior based on what's good for a specific party.
Well, one of the things you said is that not a lot of people have confidence in Mitch McConnell to organize things at this point, and that's sort of confusing the issue.
Yes, we've had an on record of questioning some of the decisions. Specifically, you could even say Mitch McConnell's decision to spend $4 million on the current Senate candidate. There were other people running, but it was a bad decision. And I think at some point the majority leader in the Senate needs to be held accountable for his actions and poor decision making himself.
So what does that mean?
Well, that means ultimately either he can organize and lead. For example, we've got close to 300 pieces of legislation that's been passed out of the House in the Senate that has not been taken up by the majority leader. This is something he needs to engage. And we've already seen one failure when it comes to repealing the ACA. If we can't get tax reform across the Senate, I guess the threshold, then I think was well within our rights to call for new leadership.
You said that you found the victims who came forward credible. So does that mean that the president takes a political hit for coming out and supporting someone who has accusers that are credible?
Well, I think that's certainly his decision to make. Where I would agree is that this is left up and should be the people of Alabama making this final decision. If you have, whether it's the House or Senate intervening in these kinds of races when there is nothing on the books, I think that sets a bad precedent. However, I'm also happy to be on record saying if you listen to Ms. Gorfman or others, some of these things check the boxes of credibility.
Right.
Listen, God's redemption is certainly the grace is for all of us, but that's not tethered to party lines. We need to be consistent. We look back in the early 90s how some of the ladies who charged former President Bill Clinton with some of the concerns they had were defamed and even attempted to be destroyed. We just need to be consistent when we look at these situations.
I hear what you're saying. You didn't really answer the question about will the president pay a political price for supporting him. Do you want to take another crack at that or pass on that one?
Well, I mean, should he pay a political price?
I don't know that he's come out and endorsed him. Go ahead. Yeah.
I do think that he, from what I understood in the brief clip that I saw from President Trump yesterday, is that he was saying that at this point, Mr. Moore has denied these charges. So I think that's where his thinking is until he has other information. I think that he's okay with moving forward.
Okay.
Like I said, the place where we do intersect is that the people of Alabama should be able to decide ultimately whether Roy Moore or Doug Jones is the next senator from Alabama.
Congressman Walker, thank you. Meantime,
Thank
the
you,
House
Melissa.
Ethics Committee is investigating claims that Democratic Congressman John Conyers sexually harassed members of his staff. It follows a report in BuzzFeed News that he settled a complaint from a staffer in 2015. And now the website has uncovered another accuser who reportedly filed a lawsuit in February claiming Conyers repeatedly touched her inappropriately. Conyers denies any wrongdoing, but now even his hometown newspaper is calling for him to resign. I am joined now by Republican Congressman Leonard Lance of New Jersey. He's a member of the House Ethics Committee. He is also co-sponsoring legislation calling for mandatory sexual harassment training. First of all, I'm shocked that there isn't already mandatory training. I mean, we have it here. It's, you know, especially now at a time when it's such a huge subject. I don't know of a company that's not doing it, so that's surprising.
We have voluntary training, and I have gone through it, and everybody in my office has gone through it. But we want to make it mandatory, and Jackie Spear is the prime sponsor of that legislation. Melissa and I am a co-sponsor.
Do you think that, you know, we should know about these claims that were settled in the past? And did you know there was a fund out there to settle such claims?
We should have complete transparency. We should know about it, and I did not know about it in the past.
So I've asked so many lawmakers in the past couple of days, and not a single person has told me that they knew about it. Who knew about it? Only the people who had settled it that way? I mean, somebody must have set it up.
Presumably that was the case, but we are going to get to the bottom of this, and moving forward, we have to be completely transparent, and taxpayer funds should not be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also, you know, I want to make the point that it wasn't just for sexual misconduct. They were solving, you know, or litigating sort of any problems that were going on in the office. Do you think that it's fair to go back and reveal the names that already went by? I mean, in a sense, these are people who came to an agreement understanding that it was going to be kept confidential. So it's a bit unfair to now change the rules after the fact. At the same time, like you said, it's our money, it's taxpayer money.
I fall on the side that we should know the facts, even if it's in the past. Perhaps lawyers will debate that, but my initial impression is that, yes, we should know what has happened in the past.
Also, it seems that there was no price for lawmakers. So if it was settled and they were paid with taxpayer dollars and the public didn't find out, was there any punishment?
Apparently not, because I presume some of these members are currently in office and have been reelected. I don't know who they have been, obviously, and I think it's important that we all find out.
And then what? I mean, what happens at that point?
I am a member of the House Ethics Committee, and the chair and the ranking member put out a statement this morning regarding the Conyers matter and saying that the Ethics Committee is aware of it. I never discussed the details of the Ethics Committee, but I want to assure your viewers that it's completely bipartisan. 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. We have a nonpartisan staff, and we investigate situations all of the time. I'm not going to comment on any specific situation, but that is why there is an ethics committee, and I think it's important that there is an ethics committee in the House.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of people want to know the details of that committee because we've heard a lot of talk about it. I mean, first and foremost, are you able to go back and investigate things that happened before officials were elected in Washington, before they came to office?
We usually investigate members while they're in office, and perhaps we'll have a discussion about that, but I've only been on the Ethics Committee since January, but I want to assure your viewers that we take our responsibilities, Melissa, seriously.
How long will it take, do you think, to do this investigation and for us to hear more about it? Because that's another fear, that it drags on forever and people have forgotten by the time you finish your work.
I think that we will act in an expeditious fashion on any matter that may come before us.
But what does that mean, do you think? I mean, in this case specifically, when we're talking about this particular fund and who was involved and what they did, how long would that take?
I don't know the answer to that, but we certainly want to get to the bottom of it as quickly as possible.
And then at the end, do you make a recommendation about what should happen to the person, or do you make your results public?
The results are made public, yes.
And then do you make a recommendation and say this person did this, and they should step down, or it's for everyone else to decide?
No, in the past we have engaged in censure, for example, in recommending that there be censure, and that is a decision of the House ultimately. But certainly the record is public once we have made a decision. What
comes with censure?
I presume that such a person could never be reelected.
You presume, but they could run. They might be reelected.
I think it's highly unlikely, Melissa.
I don't know. There's a lot of strange things now, we would see. Thank you, sir, for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
A Fox News alert. We are awaiting a decision in a trial that's fueled the debate over sanctuary cities. A jury now deciding whether an illegal immigrant deported from the U.S. several times will be held responsible for the death of a woman gunned down in San Francisco. Will justice be served? Also, investigators for special counsel Robert Mueller reportedly have questions about Jared Kushner's role in the Trump transition and a controversial resolution passed at the United Nations. So what does that have to do with the Justice Department's overall probe? Fox News alert. We are awaiting a verdict in the Kate Steinle murder trial. A California jury is in its second day of deliberating on the fate of an illegal immigrant charged with killing 32-year-old Steinle in San Francisco back in 2015. The man had been deported 5 times before the shooting. His defense team admits he fired the gun but claims it went off accidentally. Steinle's family has remained virtually silent during the trial, but her father issued this warning more than 2 years ago.
If you think this can't happen to you, think again. I'm walking down the pier, arm in arm with my daughter and a very close friend. She stops, she takes a selfie, she turns around and is shot. As she fell, she said, "Help me, Dad." That's my bedtime story. Every night.
Horrible. Claudia Cowan is live in San Francisco with the latest. Claudia.
Well, Melissa, the jury's been at it for about an hour so far this morning. If they haven't already, they will need to select a foreperson, and then they will start sifting through all of the circumstantial evidence that was presented by nearly 24 witnesses. Remember, no one actually saw the shooting, and there was no direct evidence that the defendant in this case, 45-year-old Jose Inez Garcia Zarate, meant to murder Kate Steinle. He didn't know her, but the prosecutor said motive does not matter. Diana Garcia argued Zarate was playing his own secret version of Russian roulette, that he brought a loaded gun onto a crowded pier with the sole purpose of shooting it and causing harm. A spokesman for the DA's office said their case is solid, and as for the Steinle family,
they've shown incredible resolve during this very difficult time, and we're committed to bringing them justice.
defense lawyers argued the 45-year-old Zarate, a homeless illegal immigrant and 5-time deportee, found the loaded gun wrapped in a T-shirt underneath a bench, and that when he picked it up, it accidentally discharged, the bullet bouncing off the ground before striking Kate Steinle in the back some 90 feet away. In his closing argument, Matt Gonzalez said there is no evidence his client is violent or wanted to hurt anyone, and more than reasonable doubt he committed murder. San Francisco public defender Jeff Adachi.
We had a chance to speak briefly with Mr. Garcia Zarate. He's hopeful.
The jury will now deliberate another 2 hours. If they do not reach a verdict before the long holiday break, everyone will be back to work here Monday morning. Melissa?
Claudia Cowan, thank you. New signs that investigators in the Russia probe are expanding their focus. The Wall Street Journal reports that Robert Mueller's team is looking into the president's son-in-law, White House senior advisor Jared Kushner, and his interactions with foreign leaders, including Kushner's involvement in the controversy surrounding a UN resolution passed last December that condemns Israeli settlement construction. Mueller's team also reportedly looking into Kushner's role in setting up meetings and communications with foreign leaders during President Trump's transition. James Freeman is assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal editorial page and a Fox News contributor. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, you mentioned how the investigation keeps broadening. I think people watching this might wish that it would focus on what it was supposed to be created for, which is examining if there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government in rigging the election. So here we're seeing Mueller looking at things that are not about the election. This is the transition. It's not about Russia in this case, but what is the problem with a presidential transition official talking to a foreign government? This is routine, and I don't think there's any problem talking to Israel. So I'm not sure what where this could go, but it's a reminder that a year and a half after the government started looking at this suggests we're still waiting for that evidence of.
Okay, so let me be the
collusion.
devil's advocate in that case.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just being thorough.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're looking through the communication, that would be the place to look to try and see if are they saying, boy, we had this set up ahead of time, and here's what we're expecting as a payoff, or or if they're just having straightforward conversations.
Yeah, it could be that. It could be looking for mistakes made unrelated to Russia that could nevertheless be used as pressure if you think someone has something about Russia they're not saying. In Mr. Kushner's case, he had to redo his forms disclosing foreign contacts when he came into the administration in January. Maybe there's some pressure available they see there, but I think at some point, given that this is quite an amazing action that the Obama government was investigating, surveilling the party out of power, you'd like to see some alleged or evidence of collusion at some point to justify all this.
So through that vein, right, that thread that you were talking about there, so you had the Obama administration investigating the other party and its potential candidate there. I mean, that seems to tie into that Russian dossier and Fusion GPS that we keep talking about. And was that dossier used by the FBI in order to gain warrants? It seems like if you're going to tie in what we just talked about into this investigation, that would fall into Mueller's purview as well. Do we have any hint if they're looking at that?
Well, you think that would be much more relevant.
You would think.
How did all of this begin, and what was the FBI's role? And for this reason, we've called for Mr. Mueller to resign, because as a former FBI director, it's very hard for him to, in an even-handed way, to investigate his institution, some of his former colleagues, and I think that's where the bigger questions are. Where what was it that triggered this FBI investigation? Because if it was opposition research paid for by the rival campaign, you'd hate to think that's enough in America to get the force of government focused on your opponent.
Do we have, I mean, as somebody who's worked on this story, do we have any evidence that he's looking into this at all, or that he's connected it to the investigation, the idea of the GPS?
We have very little information that he is looking there. I mean, I guess this would be another instance where if there is a recusal, you would get a fresh look at this. One would hope, but so far we're hearing a lot about Paul Manafort's previous business and how people reported things on forums, and now Jared Kushner, and he was speaking to Israel. Was he speaking to other countries? You're waiting for the word on where they're investigating what they're supposed to be investigating.
Well, and I mean, just like taking a step back for a moment, are we supposed to be hearing about any of this anyway? I mean, isn't it all supposed to be secret?
Well, in this case, and kudos to my colleagues on the news side of the Journal for doing this reporting, but it's not clear, is this coming from leaks from the investigators, which you hope not. It could be coming from the other side, from someone connected to Mr. Kushner. Obviously, once he's getting investigated, he probably has some knowledge of it. So it's not clear where this is coming from, but I think it's another reminder that what we're not seeing is any evidence related to that original premise of the May letter from Rod Rosenstein creating this investigation. It talks about links between the Trump campaign and Russia. Now, it also gives Mr. Mueller essentially an almost unlimited mandate, really, for anything he finds along the way of this investigation. But you'd like to see that it's about what they said it was about.
What's your bet on, does this wrap up? Does it keep going through the whole entire presidency? I mean, what do you think happens?
I think it goes on for years. And for that reason, I think the White House should be concerned, because this is essentially, for all practical purposes, an unlimited budget, unlimited timeline on this investigation, and they likely will find something, whether or not it's at all related to the original cause.
James, thank you. Thanks so much. President Trump says he had a great phone conversation with Vladimir Putin yesterday, but there are concerns the U.S. could be taking a backseat to Russia when it comes to the peace plan in Syria, especially after Putin met with and was photographed hugging dictator Bashar al-Assad. So should Americans be worried? President Trump spending some 90 minutes on the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday. The two leaders discussing various global issues, including the 6-year war in Syria. Listen.
We had a great call with President Putin. We're talking about peace in Syria, very important. We're talking about North Korea. We had a call that lasted almost an hour and a half. We just put out a release on the call, but we're talking very strongly about bringing peace to Syria. We're talking very strongly about North Korea and Ukraine.
That call came just one day after Putin met with and was photographed hugging Syrian dictator Bashar Assad in Russia, causing some to speculate that Moscow has now taken the lead in reshaping a post-war Syria. Let's bring in Jillian Turner back from the Outnumbered couch. She is former national security staffer to Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. She is a Fox News contributor. That was sort of an awkward picture. I guess the Syrian dictator is a lot taller, so it was a little awkward.
The optics are a little bit dangerous and sort of toxic. Anytime you're in the frame with Bashar al-Assad, like, you're in the wrong place.
So we were discussing this a little bit in the last hour, but we didn't get into it. Is there any sort of, it's clear that what Russia wants from the situation is that they want a stronghold in the region. And so they have found a country where they can sort of have a puppet government and let them run amok and back them in order to have their area. Is there any sort of agreement or any deal to be had for the U.S. to kind of allow them to remain in the area, but they have to get rid of this murderous, toxic dictator? Is that a deal that could be had?
Not really,
no.
From my perspective.
Okay.
I also think that Vladimir Putin is being terribly disingenuous with this I love Assad stuff.
Oh, sure.
I mean, the reason that Russia is in the country in the first place is because they're thinking about a post-Assad future.
Yeah.
They're thinking about when he dies, when he gets assassinated or is removed from power or whichever way he goes, what does Russia's future in this country, hence in the Middle East, look like? And they're trying, as you said, to establish a foothold in Syria so that they can have a say in that. So they can have a say in whatever kind of government comes next after Assad is gone. They are temporarily propping up Assad in the Syrian civil war because it's in their interests to do so. But I don't think that there isn't
a solution afterwards that could be mutually acceptable to both the U.S. and Russia?
That's always a possibility, but it's not something that President Trump and Vladimir Putin can handle unilaterally, sitting down, negotiating, hammering it out. These are two sides that are entrenched at this point, the way I see it. Some people would disagree with me, but Putin and the Russian regime is there on the front lines, arming and equipping Assad's soldiers. The United States, on the other hand, is arming and equipping the Syrian rebels who are fighting a civil war inside this country. So the idea that the two leaders could sit down and hash this out, to me, it's not really a feasible or a believable idea. I think they could have discussions about it, sure, but they're not going to make any progress. They're fighting a war against one another.
President Trump said during the campaign, why don't we let Syria fight ISIS, or why don't we let Russia fight ISIS? I mean, why not let them do the majority of the work there? You haven't heard him say that in a long time, and it seems like perhaps you realize that they're not in there fighting ISIS. It's kind of, there's almost two separate battles going on.
Correct. They are there to kill Syrian rebels. They are there to kill Kurds and Turkmen, and sometimes they incidentally, rather conveniently, sort of knock off an ISIS fighter or two, and then they use that as a grounds to say, look, we're fighting ISIS. But the intelligence reports have shown President Trump that this is not the case.
In terms of, so there are a lot of places where, we're going head-to-head either through proxy or directly with Russia, whether you're talking about Iran or North Korea or Syria, or there's just all kinds of places all over the place. Just because they get together and President Trump says they had a great conversation, we don't really know necessarily what the tone is. I mean, great could be, I showed him muscle, he showed me muscle, we're sizing each other up. I mean, we're not hitting the reset button, which was a fallacy.
It just, to me, seems like to come out of any conversation with Vladimir Putin this week and say it was great, I don't buy it.
What would you want him to have said?
I would want him to come out and list 2 or 3 concrete things that were accomplished in the meeting. Because to me, it's not, what did you talk about? It's not clear. How can we have a great conversation with them about a whole,
Syria. Yeah, like how can we stop
what
the
does a
bloodshed
great
in Syria?
conversation look like? We're gonna withdraw our troops, you withdraw funding. I mean, that didn't happen because that would certainly necessitate an announcement. The other thing, like the elephant in the room in this conversation, had to be Russia's meddling in the 2016 general election, because that is something the intelligence agencies here have proved. So I think any conversation that avoids that is a missed opportunity for President Trump. So if he didn't bring that up, to me, it's just a glaring hole.
One of the things that they've said in the past is that they feel like that has happened. It's time to move on to the issues that are in front of us. Do you buy that at all?
I buy that if behind the scenes we're making it very clear, we meaning the United States, if behind the scenes the United States intelligence community is making it very clear to Russians that we know exactly what transpired, it's not happening again, and if they attempt to do the same thing again in 2020, there's going to be X, Y, and Z repercussions.
We don't know one way or the
Then
other.
President Trump can stand out front and say whatever he likes, and that's fine.
We got to go. Jillian, thank you.
Thanks,
Always great.
Melissa.
Appreciate it. It's a question the president left hanging before leaving for Florida yesterday. Will he campaign for Roy Moore? We break down the risks and the rewards with As we mentioned at the top of the hour, President Trump leaving the door open to campaigning with Roy Moore after appearing to throw his support behind him.
Are you going to campaign for Roy Moore? I'll be letting you know next week, but I can tell you, you don't need somebody who's soft on crime like Jones.
All right, all this as the latest Real Clear Politics average of polls shows Moore trailing his Democratic opponent, former federal prosecutor Doug Jones, by nearly 9 points. So could the president's words help move the needle in Moore's direction? Let's put that question to our power panel. Back from the Outnumbered couch, Fox News contributor and the politics editor for townhall.com, Guy Benson, and DNC senior advisor Zach Petkanis, who headed rapid response for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. So, of course, social media and the Twitterverse is going bananas, talking about whether or not this was an endorsement. What did he really say? Kind of parsing the words. I want to go to each of you. What did you hear there?
Sure. I mean, just to be clear, I'm a former DNC advisor.
Okay.
But what I heard from President Trump was a full-throated endorsement of a pedophile. I mean, we're talking about a clear choice that Alabama voters have when they go to the polls on December 12th. They can have a former federal prosecutor that went after the Klan, who was tough on crime, or you can have someone that actually pulled an 8th grader out of class to ask her out on a date. I mean, those are the choices that Alabama voters have. Those are the choices that Donald Trump had, and he chose the pedophile.
I wouldn't say that it was a full-throated endorsement. It was trying to shift the focus back onto the Democrat in the race, Doug Jones, who is very liberal for a state like Alabama. And some of the things in his record and his stances, I think, are way out of step with the people of that state. Your point about the crux of this race being about personality, I tend to think that there is sort of a bright line question here for Republican voters to think about. But if this is a political choice to be made, it makes sense for the White House and for some Republicans who haven't abandoned Moore, many of them have, to try to draw this back into how would these people vote in the U.S. Senate? Would they vote with the interests of the people of Alabama? Doug Jones, the answer is no. The question is, can you morally justify voting for Roy Moore if you believe his accusers?
Okay, so the way that some might morally justify it in their mind is the idea that the Democrat in this race is for partial birth abortion. And, you know, to a lot of people, that is absolutely morally reprehensible. And they would feel like, well, I don't know. I mean, there's huge moral problems on both sides here. That might be one thought.
I think to draw an equivalence between a political position and someone who wants to rape 8th graders is absolutely disgusting.
Okay.
Not from you, but for people who are saying that. I think it is absolutely disgusting.
So I have made very clear that I'm not a Moore supporter. I was not a supporter of his before all of this came out. To make that clear, I think
because of a lot of his positions.
Yeah, no, I think he was unacceptable to me as a Republican voter if I lived in Alabama, which I don't. And it's up to the people of Alabama. But there are some very serious charges against Roy Moore. I find these women credible. The idea that Roy Moore is even accused of raping an 8th grader is not true.
Attempting to rape. Having sex with a 14-year-old by a grown man is rape. And I want anyone to challenge me on that point.
So let's get back to like the race at hand, though. I mean, I hear what you're saying. But
although,
now
can I just jump back? Because I want to, first of all, what he is accused of is a sexual assault, and I think it is very serious and credible, and I believe these women. I think when you start using words like rape, that is a very loaded term in terms of what he is or is not accused of, point one. And point two, I understand why you would be on a high horse morally about this, because sometimes there are very bright distinctions when it comes to politics. I would challenge you, maybe not directly, but a lot of Democrats, if Bill Clinton were up for election again, let's say he ran for president and were the nominee in 2020, he is credibly accused of forcible rape. Would they vote for him over a Ted Cruz? I think history shows the answer is yes.
Well, look, I was 15 years old when Bill Clinton left office. That's the age when Roy Moore goes after most of his girls. So, I can't speak to that. However,
would you vote for Bill Clinton if he ran again?
I think that all of these women need to be believed, and I think that we need to hold everybody accountable, whether it's Al Franken or whether it's John Conyers or whether it's Bill Clinton or whether it's Donald Trump.
So you would not vote for Bill Clinton for president against Ted Cruz?
Would you vote for Donald Trump?
I didn't. Your question.
But you didn't
back
answer.
to you.
You still didn't answer.
I was 15 years old.
Yeah, that's a dodge.
Yeah, that's a dodge. You don't want to answer.
I mean, look, I think that
he was accused of forcible rape.
I think that all women need to be believed, and I think
like Juanita Broderick.
Okay.
Look, I think women need to be believed.
Okay. There we go. So you've got a holiday to-do list, and so do the people that work for you in Congress. But what exactly are lawmakers' top priorities before the end of the year? Our power panel right here stands by, and we'll ask that next. I want to know. Well, it's going to be a busy December when lawmakers return to Capitol Hill after Thanksgiving. They'll have just a handful of legislative days to check everything off their to-do list. Among the top priorities, finishing their tax overhaul to get a bill to the president's desk by Christmas, averting a government shutdown, which could be complicated by the Democrats' threat to withhold support for the spending bill if it doesn't include help for dreamers. Lawmakers will also try to reach a deal on the debt limit, which expires December 8th, and if that's not enough, they only have until mid-December to decide whether to reimpose sanctions on Iran. Not easy. We're back with our panel, Guy Benson and Zach Petkanis. Zach, what do you think? That is a busy schedule.
I think it is a really tall order, and I think it is especially tall order for this crowd who have now control of the White House, the Senate, the House, and to date they have not been able to get anything done. So the idea that they're going to get all of this done in the next 2 weeks, I think, is undermined by history.
Guy, what's priority number one?
It's got to be tax reform because of the attack that we just heard from Zach, which is legislative accomplishments have been scant. But the Democrats, in the meantime, are going to try to gum up the works and slow that down with all of these other moving parts within a span of just a couple weeks. Keep in mind, the whole DACA situation with the Dreamers, that's going to come back. Right. That sort of went away. There's a deadline ticking on that. So it's going to be a handful, I think, for Republican leadership.
Is it possible to use the number of issues? The president could maybe use it to his advantage. Like, we have all these things. You want this. I need this.
Make some tremendous deals.
Yeah, that was a good impression. I'm a little more Alec Baldwin than President Trump, but I love it. Go ahead.
I mean, look, I think that it's going to be very difficult to get Democrats on board with, for example, the tax reform bill. We're absolutely going to slow that down. I mean, there was a recent study that came out this week that said it is going to raise taxes with over half of American households.
It's not.
It's going to cut Medicare by over $400 billion over the next 10 years.
It's not.
I mean, there's studies coming today, including, I might add, the Republican-led Congressional Budget Office that says it's going to raise taxes on middle-class families.
No,
that's
so we're
in 2024 when things in there sunset, and so it's just an argument for keeping
it does
the
just
tax
not
cuts
immediately.
permanent.
No. If Democrats
why are they permanent?
I don't know. Let's do it. Let's make it permanent. I love the idea.
That's not in the tax reform bill.
Let's get back to the issue at hand, though. So we've seen what's going to happen on tax reform. Is there a deal to be made, maybe in the background, on DACA in exchange for helping with something else?
You know, I've said a long time since this issue, since President Trump reversed DACA, which I think was legally the right thing to do. There is an easy fix here, in my view, which is to formalize the so-called amnesty for Dreamers in exchange for better border protection and enforcement.
Yeah.
And if you look at polling, there was a poll that came out a few months ago when this was a hot burner issue. 70% almost of the American people supported that sort of a trade-off. Helping the dreamers, beefing up our national security at the border. If you put those two together, that ought to pass. If Democrats want to say, no, we only want it our way, a clean bill or nothing, then that's going to be on them. But I think there's a compromise that ought to be made.
If you were trying to be bipartisan, you're trying to come together and do something, what would be the number one thing that you would want, you think you could get, that you would put out there as maybe an offering, real quick?
I mean, we have long supported additional border security, not a wall, additional border security. However, it's up to Republicans if they want to keep the government open.
There we go. We'll be back with more Outnumbered Overtime in a second.